Hey everyone, welcome to Dispatch Live. Can everybody hear me? As you can see, we are pleased to be joined by David French, a regular, whom you all know, and you probably also know this other guest. We have with us Representative Liz Cheney, who is the Vice Chair of the January 6th Committee. Thank you for taking some time to chat with us tonight. I'm sure you didn't really have anything else going on.
No,
Probably just
it was
relaxing.
a slow night, Steve. So thanks.
Just trying to do what we can to fill your calendar, keep you busy.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming and taking a few minutes to chat with us. There's a lot going on. Let me just start with the sort of big picture and most obvious question. We've had members send us questions for you tonight, and this was one of the popular ones. What are you trying to do with these hearings generally and with the hearing in prime time on Thursday night?
Well, I think first of all, with the hearings themselves, it's part of our responsibility as a committee charged with investigating what happened on January 6th and what led up to it, and ensuring that we have a complete picture about what happened so that we can make recommendations if we need to legislatively. And I think it's really important for the American people to understand how the attack unfolded, to understand what provoked the attack. We have, talked to close to maybe over now 1,000 people. And a lot of times, as you all know, it's the people who sort of some of the names of people who have resisted participating, who've obstructed, who've tried not to cooperate with the committee, that those folks get a lot of attention. The reality is the vast majority of people that the committee has reached out to have understood, that it's really important for them. Obviously, it's their duty as citizens, but have cooperated with the committee. And so I think that we will be in a position to show sort of an initial set of findings and to begin to walk through what happened and to make sure that we're taking steps necessary legislatively so that it never happens again.
You obviously, one of the things at the center of the discussion, the debate this week about the committee is its relatively partisan makeup, more Democrats than Republicans. My old colleague Britt Hume on Fox News yesterday was criticizing the committee, saying basically, yeah, there are a couple of Republicans, but they were handpicked by Nancy Pelosi, and she only did that because she knew they were going to go along with the conclusions that she wanted. And obviously, tomorrow we've got a press conference from Republicans in the House, other Republicans in the House, designed to upset and discredit the committee before we even get going. What do you say to people who come to these hearings with sort of an open mind, but are concerned about the partisan makeup? I mean, it is the case that there are more Democrats than Republicans. What do you say to those people?
Well, I think they're different answers depending upon who's asking the question. I mean, just in terms of people who have a legitimate question versus people that are just sort of trying to launch, partisan attacks on the committee and on the work. I think that it is, as you point out, the committee is certainly not an ideal entity. I wish that we had the bipartisan commission that unfortunately the Republicans in the House and then the Republicans in the Senate killed. And I think that's a really important point. But once that bipartisan commission had been rejected by my party, by the Republicans, the question became, are you going to investigate, or are you simply going to say, too bad, we're going to throw our hands up and walk away? And I don't think that there's any way that we could have said we're going to throw our hands up and walk away. And I also think that all of us, every one of us, and I say this as somebody who, I've been involved in partisan battles for many years, and I certainly have been an active participant in a lot of those partisan battles. But there comes a moment where I think we all need to say, wait a minute, this isn't a moment for, how can we launch rapid response rooms and how can we treat this like it's some kind of political game? This was a violent assault on the United States Capitol. and it was provoked by a sitting president of the United States. And he had he oversaw a multi-part plan that was focused on, and the objective of which was for him to stay in power, to overturn the results of an election and stay in power. And I would say to people, as you're listening to, some of my colleagues and others who think that the way to respond to this investigation is with politics and partisanship, those people are not acting in a way that is healthy for the country. And if we really want to understand why January 6th is a line that can never be crossed again, then we really do have to sort of put the politics and the partisanship aside and say, what happened? Let's understand what happened, and let's do everything we can to protect ourselves from it in the future.
David?
Yes, I've got a question. Let's take off your January 6th hat for a moment and put on your lifetime Republican hat for a minute. Because when I think of the Stop the Steal effort, I think of the comprehensive plan to overturn the election, the spasm of violence on January 6th itself. But I also think about the lingering hold that the stolen election narrative has on the Republican base, on many Republican elected officials. Is there a case for optimism that hold is slipping? How much did you look at, for example, Brad Raffensperger, who directly confronted Trump, and Brian Kemp, who not as direct, but did the right thing, obviously, during the election steal effort? What do you think is the current state of the hold of the stolen election narrative on the GOP?
Well, it's a really important question. I think certainly when we saw the elections, the outcome of the elections in Georgia, that the fact that Secretary Raffensperger didn't even have to be in a runoff, that he was able to win straight out. I think that gives you a sense of perhaps the hold isn't as strong as it might have been, or as people have been thinking it is. There are far too many people in my party. There are far too many people who have been lied to, who are betrayed by President Trump, who continue to be betrayed and lied to by him, people who supported him, but then, who have in the months since he continues to tell the same lies. And I think people continue to believe him. And so there are far too many people who've been betrayed. There also are far too many people who know it's not true, absolutely know it's not true. And I think that, we all know who some of those people are. And that's really dangerous, because you don't have enough people sort of on the other side of the lie saying this is not true. His own campaign told him he'd lost the election. His Department of Justice told him there's no evidence that there was fraud here that would have overturned the election. They tracked down the allegations that he was hearing, and they told him they weren't true. His own, Department of Homeland Security told him he lost all of his cases in court. And yet, he still continued to spread the lie, and people believed it, and they still continue to believe it. So I think everybody who knows it's not true, which is the majority of people in my party, has a duty to say so, has a duty to say, this is just not true. You may have wished the election had turned out differently, but it didn't. And if we want to win the next election, we had better embrace the Constitution. We better not go down this path of embracing this lie.
One quick follow-up to this, because this is something that has been talked about a lot, this sort of dichotomy between what people know is right and accurate and versus what they're willing to say publicly. And there's been some, discussion that some of that is driven by fear, the fear of threats, the fear of violence. And then some of it's driven by kind of just standard garden variety political expediency / fear of your political future. As you see this, how much of this is driven by that kind of more raw primal concern and fear of like what could happen to my family and my life, versus this is just this is the standard clinging to power kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think there's certainly both elements of that. I mean, look, I think that when you have the kind of violence that we saw on the 6th, and look, we had violence that was of a different nature, but we certainly had violence was completely unacceptable in the summer of 2020. And but again, that was very different. This was in the 6th, an attempt to overturn an election, an attempt by a president to stay in power. But when you begin to see violence become part of our political process and our political dialogue, I do think that people do fear for their safety. I think it's much more, though, that people just, they just sort of feel like, well, it's easier if I just keep my head down and, I don't want to rock the boat and I want to stay in office. And people who do that have forgotten, why they're in office in the first place. And I suppose that's a diplomatic way to say it.
My friend Eric Erickson wrote in his newsletter today that basically this is a one-day thing. People aren't that interested anymore. Sort of time to move on was the argument. We hear that from a lot of conservatives. I guess I wonder if you think the committee is misnamed, calling it the January 6th committee because it's focused on that spasm of violence that day, and whether the real issue isn't what you said before, which was this sort of weeks-long attempt by the president of the United States to remain in power, to block the peaceful transfer of power. I don't want to minimize what happened on that day. It was horrible, and I expect that we'll hear a lot more details about just how horrible it was in these hearings. But isn't the bigger deal for people who want to sort of shrug off the day and say, yeah, that was terrible, too bad it happened? Isn't the bigger question, we can't operate like this. We can't have a president who, calls the Secretary of State of Georgia and tries to bully him into changing votes, has campaign workers who bully election workers. We can go through the whole list. Is the emphasis on the wrong thing if we're focusing just on January 6th, the day?
I think that what people need to recognize is that the day and the violence, what happened that day, wasn't spontaneous, and it was, very much connected to what we saw in the months leading up to it. And the other thing I think people really have to realize and stop and think about, and that part of our challenge and our responsibility on this committee is to get people to stop and think. People need to stop and think about the fact that, as the violence ended that day, as the mob began to leave the Capitol, the president didn't condemn them. If you look at what he said at 6:01, he justified it. He said, these are the things that happened. And so I think that's a really important part of this. There, you can see very much, his tweet on December 19th talking about, be wild, be here on January 6th. You've had now both members of the Oath Keepers and members of the Proud Boys. Some pled guilty, some have been indicted for seditious conspiracy. And they've talked about, and you can read it in the Justice Department filings, the fact that they were motivated by the tweet, and you can see the mobilization that happened in the aftermath. And so what Donald Trump did was he really mobilized and motivated and summoned the mob, and the lie about the election was what lit the flame. And you can also hear the defendants in a number of these cases and a number of people the committee's interviewed who say, yeah, we came, we were in the Capitol, we came that day, we were doing what Donald Trump wanted us to do, and he told us the election was stolen, and so we came because we thought we could change things. So it's connected, and I think that's what's really important for people to understand, and the fact that he has continued in the aftermath to make the same claims and to say the same things.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I want to ask you one last quick one. How much of what we're likely to hear in these hearings in the coming days and weeks will come from people who are long loyal to Donald Trump, people who worked in the White House for him, people who have who were loyal to him until January 6th?
A good bit of it. I mean, I think, you will hear from Republicans who worked in his administration. You'll hear from Republican state officials. You'll hear from people who, understood that the election had been lost, for example, who told him, that there was not fraud at a level that would have overturned the results. And I think that, it's one of the things that gives me hope about the future, that there have been so many, and some of them are junior, so many young people who have talked to the committee, who have come in. We've already interviewed, who seem to have a much better understanding about how damaging and wrong these things were, and who have been courageous and willing to speak out and willing to say, no, that's not, I don't want to be part of that. And I think that gives me real hope for the future, and sort of for the next generation, that they understand that the republic can't survive if a president won't commit to the peaceful transition of power. And that's just fundamental to our system of government.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to us tonight. We're
Yeah,
looking forward to the
Great
hearings.
to be with you guys.
We will be covering them. Glad to have you, and we will circle back with you in the middle of them or when they're done.
Great. I look
Tell
forward
us how
to
they
it.
went.
Thanks
Thanks
very
again.
much. I'm honored to be on the Dispatch. I'm a big fan. So thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Well, thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was really interesting.